Hey guys, how you doing today? I think I got a fun video today. I ran a poll recently in the Sorcery fan page group on Facebook, and one of the feedback that I received is that people like to hear about the history of the game, which is great because that's really what I'm into, and having a lot of fun trying to investigate some of the early development and talk to some of the artists about how they came up with some of the design concepts and how the not only the art concept, but the card mechanics and the development of those have kind of evolved and changed over the past couple of years and through the various tabletop simulator releases and card updates and releases we've seen over the past, 12 to 18 months or so. So I'm on the Collector Art House website here, and what I'm going to talk about today is some of the artwork by Brian Smith. So I reached out to Brian. I had done an interview with Brian a while ago, and one of the folks in my Patreon had purchased one of his original artworks and asked me to do a behind the art feature article about that painting. And that one was, let's see if it's on here. Yeah, it was the Whirling Blades. What you're looking at here is a page with all of the latest cards from the update that was just released in early November. And I had just done an article on Whirling Blades, right? So I was reaching out to Brian. We were talking about the context and the history of this card specifically, but there's two others that I'm going to talk about today. As I got to talking to him, there's some fascinating background information about Atlas Wanderers and Devil's Egg. But before I go there, I wanted to talk about the design construct of a card in Sorcery, how they go about designing the card and how you talk about the different elements. Right, so at the top of the card, you have the title box, you have the card title in the middle here, your mana cost symbol, it's just a number for the mana cost, the symbol for the threshold, which tells you the element type, and so does the color banner here. The power levels over here. So you got title box, type line text at the top of this bottom box, and then the rules box, or what I refer to as the card mechanic. That's where the card mechanic is described, and then sometimes you'll also see the flavor text line within the box. And they do that on some cards, not on others. I think there's a bit of a spacing issue where you can't always do that, and it's not always fitting for the card theme. So sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. All right, so what I wanted to talk about was the history of Brian Smith's Atlas Wanderers. Okay, so I'm going to pull a few images into the screen and kind of tell the story from its early beginnings. But before I do so, another point I wanted to make here is that one of the beautiful things about Sorcery is that you see a lot of thoughtfulness and effort going into making sure that different elements of the card is very tight and closely correlated to kind of convey a theme, a message, a kind of an experiential vibe of how that card is used and interacts with the board state. So what I mean there is everything from the title, the artwork, the painting itself, it's all hand painted, the type line text, the game mechanic, and then the flavor text if it's there. All right, so we're going to see that when I go to the example for Atlas Wanderers. And here is my first image. Actually, hold that thought. I have one even earlier than that. This was the original painting that Brian did, and this is a scan or a picture of that painting of Atlas Wanderers, right? Original version is what I have it titled. So you see here, you have the celestial elements, the up top here, up in the sky, and this kind of facial structure in the background. So all of that is consistent, except very noticeable is you don't have the figures carrying these, right? So that was omitted. And I'm going to get to why that was added as Brian iterated with Eric Olofsson, the art director and creator of the game. And one point on that is, Brian comes from a bit of a different background. This was the first TCG he has done, so it's kind of funny. He was telling me he doesn't follow the conventional process that a lot of artists do, where you do a sketch and you go back and forth, especially when you're doing a hand painting, right? You can't hit the Control-Z undo button and go back and change things. Sometimes he had to completely repaint because of his approach, and his approach was he just dives right in and he just starts doing the work, right? And if Eric didn't like it, or if it was off base and the change was significant enough, he had to go and repaint the entire thing, sometimes several times for one piece of artwork. So some took him over a month, considerable amount of time as a result of that, but that's just his style. He typically doesn't do commissions. He does more or at least he hadn't prior. I think he'd probably take commissions if you asked him. So you should definitely reach out. But he was more used to doing his own thing, is what I'm trying to say, and just create from his own mind and sell through Instagram and his website and his Facebook and other social media, right? So this is what you have on this one. He was able to make some adjustments. So he started with this, the early design, and then Eric asked him to add these beings that are carrying the atlas or the planets here, right? So this was his first rendition of that. You see this person kind of spliced out to show, I guess, motion or juggling several things here, and I guess simulate this trying to convey this image or message of rearranging, right? So this is an early version of the card. It was actually called Atlas Shrug. So he's in kind of this shrugging posture. And then it talks about unique magic of celestial proportions. So here's the celestial beings. He's carrying the planets. And it's rearrange all site placement. So he's rearranging the orientation of these elements is what I think it's trying to convey. And then here you see in the early version, it did have a flavor text. Atlas, is it only time before you let us fail? So this was Brian had done the painting like we saw in the prior version, submitted this to Eric. Eric provided this template, and then the other aspect of not doing the sketch right is kind of getting the spacing right. Another thing Brian told me is that he would paint something, and then this text box would really kind of disrupt the composition or cause some kind of issue, and he'd have to adjust and do clever things to kind of get it to fit in place, right? So here's the first iteration on that, and then the next evolution. Again, you see it in this same template, unique magic of celestial proportions. And if I blow this up, you get the little beans, right? So you scale that down. And something that I think Eric does a masterful job here is really making sure the aesthetics of the card and the balance of the art composition with the text box is very clean and nice and presentable looking. And it really draws your attention to the focal point of the artwork and how that mirrors, again, the gameplay mechanic and the title. It's all very fitting and fits very cleanly in place, and your mind immediately just naturally goes to what that card's supposed to do. So these little beings here were kind of broken out into independent bodies and a little de-emphasized, and that is what we have now in the final version, consistent. Except we've had a name change, Atlas Wanderers, and then also the game mechanic. Well, let's first go to the type line text. Elite giants bear the weight of the world, right? So there's these small things, undersized relative to the beings, as opposed to the prior version where we saw that this guy was pretty large, just a scale of this, pretty large compared to these. So these were toned down, and then it gives this impression that they're bearing the weight of the world, right? So it fits a tight line text very tightly. And now let's see the game mechanic. Genesis, this site and an adjacent site change place, carrying along everything of normal size. All right, so again, it's that kind of that rearranging, changing places type vibe, and you see that's where you have these multiple elements in motion being carried. So that was the first one I wanted to talk about. That was a pretty interesting evolution. First I had seen, I don't know that anyone's seen those prior versions without these beans or the larger man there carrying those. So that was pretty cool. And then we started going through his archives and saying, all right, what else do I have in this older template? And he honed in on Devil's Egg. And this one's pretty interesting here. I think this is the final art version. And let's see if I have it up. If I go to my folder. So we're looking for Devil's Egg. Here is that's the framed painting. And then here's this great picture in Brian's studio of the final artwork, right? So we have the Devil's Egg, and then he was trying to create some sense of chaos. I think he told me diabolic chaos above the egg, right? So that's what this splitting face and mouth, kind of gnarly looking, some kind of evil omen over the Devil's Egg, which is fitting there. And then these kind of dark beans here, right? All right, so now let's go back. They're taking this back to the beginning. Let me show you the earliest, most version of this. This is the first painting he did for Devil's Egg, and you see this is completely different, right? Like just the egg kind of oozing these worms, and kind of similar up here, the vibe, but the egg was significantly reworked, and they went back and I think they wanted to again, draw the reader's attention or the viewer's attention to the egg. Give it this diabolical deep red vibe, and this is your next iteration. So if I go to, I think this is actually, let me go first to the painting version. Grab that from my other screen here. Yeah, so let's look at the card here. All right, and I want to look at it side by side with this one, or let's look at it with the painting, right? Because if you look at the original painting, you see that these two beans were de-emphasized. That's not really the point of the card, right? The focus is the devil's egg. So when you look at the devil's egg, I could probably organize this a little more cleanly. I'm going to expand that one and expand this one so we could get a sense side by side. You see the two figures are greatly diminished. You almost wouldn't notice them. Like there's a zoom effect, so it zooms in on the egg. The egg becomes the focal point. These two beans are greatly diminished. In fact, this one's completely cut out if you follow my cursor. And then this one is still there, but it's so faint that without this context, you almost don't know what that is, or you could kind of overlook it, right? But you still have you have the zoom of the teeth here for that kind of like dark omen type aspect, and then really beautiful deepening of the red here to really make that devil's egg pop. So if I blow that up now, you see an elite relic of diabolical affliction. And so the red symbolizes affliction, and it's a devil's egg. At the end of each turn, the controller of devil's egg site loses 1 life. So again, just talking through kind of the evolution and the thoughtfulness that goes into the card design, and really how I think this is, I saw another interview recently with, what's his name? Alpers Markov. He's a guy that does, Concept and Legends, I think, is his YouTube channel. He does a really good channel. He interviews a lot of the Magic the Gathering artists, and he was recently at the Magic 30-year anniversary event, and he was interviewing one of the art directors and game creator. I guess he was an art director for Wizards of the Coast, and the art director was talking about how at the end of the day, you're developing this artwork with the mind that it's going to go on the card and it's a game piece at the end of the day, right? So it has to very much convey what that card is going to do. It's got to have a central purpose, a focus. It needs to be clear. Now, Magic does a lot of thematic coherence, like, with specific lore and a story. Sorcery has not delved on that thus far, although I think they're planting roots here. We could see like a devil's egg in the alpha set could lead to something in the future. With a set theme, in this type of realm. But the point being is that it's a game piece. So you need to look at it. You need to understand what the focal element is. This is the devil's egg in this case, and get a sense of what that does. And that resonates very strongly. Eric is a very accomplished art director. I think he has a great vision for how he's going about this. And as he was talking about that in an interview with the Magic director, it just occurred to me that Sorcery also does a beautiful job, probably the best I've seen, to really focus the art with the full frame and really be conscious of how the artwork pairs with the title and with the game mechanic to be so cohesive that you just naturally feel and understand what it does as a player and also appreciate it as a collector and the beautiful aesthetic of the art itself. Since this is all hand-painted art, which is unique to Sorcery in and of itself in a world where a lot of TCGs are doing purely digital or a hybrid of hand-painted and digital. This really makes Sorcery stand out. All right, so that's all I had for you today. Hope you enjoyed that context. If you do or have any comments or suggestions, please drop those in the notes. Like and subscribe and share with your friends, and I appreciate your interest. Take care, everybody.